That's why I never became a musician. So how did I become a filmmaker? Well, I started back in 1995, almost 30 years ago. I was 14, 15 years old, and obviously we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have all the great cameras we have today, we didn't have all the options we have today. So all I had was this little camera that I borrowed from a friend, and I remember the LCD was black and white, and I was shooting basically, like a handy cam basically. All I knew how to do was zoom, focus, and that was pretty much it. And you know what? And I was delighted with that. I didn't think about anything else because I didn't know any better. So I was just glad that I could shoot something and watch it later on my television set. I must have made dozens, if not hundreds, of short films. Well, not hundreds, but close to 100 short films in the span of maybe 4 or 5 years. We'd be making, when I say we, I mean me and my friends, mostly one good friend of mine. We'd be shooting movies during lunch break at school, over the weekends. We were shooting and shooting on every opportunity we had. And it was a great learning curve to begin with. My first notions of editing was basically in-camera editing. So what would happen was I was shooting my friend, and I'd tell him to freeze, stop there, and I'd change the camera angle. So basically simulating coverage, and then I'd say action, and he would pick up from where he left off, and he would go on with the scene. So I was basically doing this coverage with different shots live during his performance. So I would say stop, cut, and he would freeze, and I would change the camera angle and say action, and he would continue his action, and we would progress. And that's how I unknowingly started editing my films in camera, because I didn't even understand the concept of editing at that point. I was just shooting. Everything was instinct. I was just doing what I thought felt right. And we worked like this for maybe a year, doing all these short films where the cuts would, happen real time. There wasn't like coverage done for traditional filmmaking. That was beyond my scope of understanding. Later on, I'd say about a year later, after this all started, I finally started editing with 2 VCRs, because I had 2 VCRs. I would record the footage, the entire footage, first of all as a backup into a VHS tape, so that would be kind of a backup, and then I'd do it again, but I'd start editing. So I'd record it to the VCR, and I'd pause whenever I wanted to make my cut, my edit. There were no second chances, basically. I had to get that edit just right. Otherwise, I'd have to start all over again. And sometimes, if I made a mistake, I'd have to start chewing from the previous take to make up for the mistake I had made in the next take. I don't know if this makes sense, but imagine if I'm recording this shot that lasts 13 seconds, and then I want to cut at 13 seconds, and I want to insert the next shot, or whatever shot I want from my edit. I have to stop at 13, and I'm going to press record at the exact right time, so that when the camera's playing the shot that I want to include next, the VHS recorder will start recording. And I had to account for delays, because we're talking about old technology, so there was always a delay when I'd press record on the VHS. But I got really good at it. I got really good at understanding all the delays and doing this laborious manual process of editing. And then what I do when I had this first cut, like this lineup of whatever I was doing, be it a short film, we sometimes shot some music video clips, which is really fun, stuff like from Guns N' Roses and whatever was trendy at the time. I remember we did a really funny GoldenEye music video, because GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan had just come out, so we were all excited, and we were 15, so we did a music video with Tina Turner's song GoldenEye, and my friend playing back to Tina Turner's song, which is really funny because he was a 15-year-old boy. He was like playing back to Tina Turner's performance. But anyway, I did all kinds of stuff, and once I had that lineup done, I would then pick up that VHS with the lineup, and I would record to another VCR, but this time I would add a sound mixer in between, and I would add music and sound effects and stuff. I remember I got sound effects from the video game Mortal Kombat from my Sega Mega Drive, which is, I believe, Genesis in the United States. I'd have the game running, and there was a little option where you could toggle through all the sound effects the game had, like the punches. And if my scene had punches, I would just press the button as it was happening, as I was recording. So I had to nail it perfectly. So I'd press play on my lineup, and I'd press record on my other VCR, and the sound was going. This was all live. There was no room for mistakes. So I had to press the button for the sound effect to be at the spot it needed to be, and this was very tedious. And imagine adding music in the mix and all that. So I had to do all of that at the same time. So imagine how much I learned from all that experience in terms of editing and getting what I needed to do and problem solving, which is something every filmmaker should be good at, is problem solving. And these early years were like a huge workshop of problem solving and editing and not having the tools but trying to make it work. And it kind of did work sometimes. Obviously the movies were, the films were bad. I was 15. We didn't know what we were doing. But the mere fact that they exist is a good sign, and that I pulled it off. We even shot feature-length stuff. I remember later in 97, 98, we shot like an hour-long movie. Sometimes the longest one we shot was 1 hour and 40 minutes, which is pretty damn long for us. And imagine an hour and 40 minutes of this laborious process that I'm talking about. So it was really, it was my foundation to who I am today as an editor and as a professional. So anyway, this was my process for the better part of 5-6 years until computers were advanced enough to include editing software like Premiere and stuff. So I started working with really early versions of Premiere, and I managed to buy a capture card, which was ultra expensive at the time, but I managed to get one. I don't even know how, but I did it. And so finally, around 1999, 2000, around then, I started editing on computer finally. So I would just basically transport all the footage into the computer from the tapes, and then I would do what you're familiar with today, but in a much more nightmarish way, because the computer would crash every other time I was doing something, so I had to save constantly. It was another obstacle, but it was definitely better than just working with all the tapes and all the VHS stuff. That's the point when I started working on computers and started refining my editing, because finally I could edit and not have to rely on being perfect on the first try or the second try. I could just go back and choose and change, and how it is with editing. That was a huge leap for me in terms of my workflow and my productivity as a young filmmaker. I remember something interesting about September 11th, 9/11 in the United States. On the previous night, before the terrorist attacks, I was editing a short film I had shot, and I remember it took me like an hour to render the title sequence, which was nothing more than a couple of shots mixing with each other and titles on top. And this, because the computer was slow and the technology was still in its infancy, it took me like an hour just to render those like maybe minute and a half sequence. And I remember that clearly because of the terrorist attacks, because when I woke up the next morning, the planes had crashed into the World Trade Center, sadly. So that is ingrained in my memory forever. I was 21 years old. I was 21 years old, and I will never forget that, obviously for obvious reasons. Anyway, at this point, my filmmaking was getting sharper. I thought about going to film school, but sadly my life took a huge turn when we had a fire at our house and everything. We lost everything. I lost all my old tapes. All the work that I had done up until then was completely lost. This was in 2002. And that basically set my life back a lot. I had to get work. I started working at a movie theater as an usher, taking people to their seats, which was a great experience, by the way. This was the point where me and my friend with whom I worked, he was basically the lead actor in all my movies. We were starting to take this a little more seriously, and we started to write scripts, and try to get good actors, friends, but try to really get good people in the projects that we were doing. And so this was kind of the slow shift into more professional setting. And curiously enough, one of the feature, not feature because it's like an hour long, but whatever you want to call that, one of those movies I made ended up in a film festival, and I don't remember how, but it ended up in a film festival in Italy, and we won 3 awards, and one of them was for directing, which was amazing for me. Obviously, it was a small festival. I'm not talking about big festivals with professional films. We were competing with other, amateur people. I won Best Director, and that was amazing. And that little award and that little film kind of kickstarted my professional career, because I then met a young producer who was working on a short film, and he wanted to hire someone to shoot like the making of this short film he was producing with another director. But when we met and we started exchanging ideas, we connected so well that we ended up working together, and we ended up shooting 2 projects for television. We made a television series, 2 television shows, 13 episodes each. I directed all the episodes, and that was a great experience. So we did that. And all of that began because of this little short film that I made with absolutely no money with my friends, that somehow ended up in a festival in Italy, and somehow kind of kickstarted, as I said, my film career, or my career as a filmmaker, as a director, which is what I'm primarily considered as I see myself, at least. And after that, basically, as I did those 2 shows, those were all professional television shows. That's when I truly started to learn to work with the crew, with the DP, with an AC, with all the good stuff a real film crew has. And eventually, later on, I shot a feature film, which I made a video about. If you're curious about that, my whole experience making that feature film, I will leave a link somewhere here or in the description below if you're curious about that process. At 15, I started making this junk, just experimenting and learning and experimenting and learning, and I'm repeating myself because this is so important to do and make mistakes and keep doing them and blah blah blah. And eventually, it transformed into a professional career, and that's where I am today. And that's how I learned filmmaking. I never went to film school. Nobody ever taught me how to edit. Nobody ever taught me how to shoot, how to do coverage, how to compose an image, how to focus, how to anything. All that I know about filmmaking today was completely self-taught and out of experience and out of making mistakes. And I guess that's the reason why I wanted to make this video. I believe that cameras are irrelevant. If I did what I did in the 90s, where the quality wasn't even coming into question, and all I did was just trying to shoot stuff and just really concerned about story and about composition and about nailing my focus, I basically learned how to focus manually during those days. And today I use a follow focus, obviously, and all the good stuff. So imagine my progress from coming to having to focus, having the lens near my eye, not the lens, the viewfinder, and having to focus and nailing all that and zooming at the same time and learning all those stuff and all those things. And today it's just so seamless to me because everything is so simplified. It's made to be so much easier and simpler. And I guess my point is, I digressed a little bit, but I think the younger generation is just too obsessed with cameras and specs and it needs to have autofocus. The dynamic range isn't good enough. Oh, this one has noise at ISO 800. Oh, this one doesn't. Oh, this one is cleaner. And everyone seems to be missing the point, which is you need to tell a good story. And if you're telling a good story, all those little problems, they're not problems anymore. People don't care. If the story is good enough, people will be engaged. As I said, I won awards with films shot on video weight where my entire technical setup was in a camera, from sound to image and everything else. So I think the younger generation, I'm obviously including everyone, but many videos I watch on YouTube and people I talk to, it's just too obsessed with specs and cameras, and I can't make a film with this camera because it's 5 years old, or this one doesn't have autofocus, or I don't have this lens, or I can't, no sei que. I'm sorry, that's Portuguese coming out. And I can't do this or that. And I keep saying to myself, these kids have no idea what the struggle was to grow up without all of these technologies. I mean, I wish I had an iPhone in 1995. Imagine what I could have done. I wish I had a drone in 1995. It just wasn't the reality, so I had to make do with what I had. And this taught me to appreciate and understand that technology is there to help you. Obviously, in the better gear you have, the easier your life will become, but it will never be about the gear. It will never be about the camera. You will never be stopped from producing something because of gear. If you have the minimum these days, it's like a smartphone. If you have a smartphone, you can create and you can tell stories. And that's what I wanted to really convey in this video. Stop obsessing about cameras. Stop obsessing about Netflix approved. Oh, I can't shoot this because it's not a Netflix approved camera. That's all, I'm sorry, it's all bullshit. On one video I did about the Canon 650D and Magic Lantern, and how you can basically have a budget, small, modest cinema camera for like $200/euros. There are no excuses for young people to not be creating and pursuing their dreams. And it's important to do that because you need to learn. And that's how you learn. You don't learn by watching videos. You don't learn by listening to someone telling you something. You learn it by doing it. You learn by practicing and making mistakes and becoming better with each project you shoot. And I hope this is a cautionary tale for anyone who's watching this and has made it this far, that there are no excuses these days. You just have to be creative, and you can shoot whatever you want. The technology today is amazing. You can get amazing footage. We're talking 4K, 8K, whatever. I was shooting, what was it, 720 by 576i interlaced, and it was just dreadful. If you compare the image that I was getting in the 90s with a smartphone, it's just like night and day. There are no excuses for you not to be creating. Like there were no excuses for me back then, because back then I had video cameras and handy cams and consumer-oriented products in the 90s, which was obviously, dreadful by today's standards. So I say again, go out and shoot with whatever you have and just tell a good story. And before I go, I'd love to know how you started with filmmaking, or if you're starting right now, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know what your experience is. If you don't know anything, how do you feel about that, and how are you learning? And if you like this video, leave a like, subscribe if you like this kind of content. I do stuff on cameras and equipment and whatever I feel talking about that pertains to filmmaking, hence the name of this channel, the Filmmaking Channel. So thank you very much for watching. If you made it this far, my sincere thank you, and I will see you next time.